Last month, I took a look at Australia's federal electoral history. I noticed that in the 1980s, Australia voted for their left wing Labour Party when everywhere else in the world voted for their right wing parties. That video has been a smashing success, gaining over 980 views. I also noticed that in the 1960s, at every opportunity, Australians re-elected a right-wing government. This is in contrast to Canada electing the Liberal Party, America electing the Democratic Party, Britain electing their Labour Party, and many other countries. So why? Why did Australia re-elect a right-wing conservative government when the rest of the Anglosphere didn't? Well, first off, let's start off with why these other countries voted left. Starting off with Canada, the very first election of the decade, the 1962 election, saw Lester Pearson's Liberals take a huge chunk out of John Diefenbaker's Progressive Conservatives. At the previous election in 1958, the PCs won the largest majority in Canadian history, with 78% of all the seats. Flash forward to 1962, Diefenbaker no longer has a majority and are only above water by 17 seats. A huge debate over American nuclear missiles being placed in Canada caused Diefenbaker's government to be massively unpopular. An election was called for April 1963, where the Liberals and Lester Pearson won with 5 less seats than needed for a majority. Throughout Pearson's first term, he got help from the New Democrats to keep power, but by 1965, he was getting tired and dissolved Parliament. While Pearson did win with more seats than in 1963, he still didn't get a majority and continued to get help with the New Democrats. The New Democrats pressured Pearson to implement a crazy, radical left, Marxist new idea called universal healthcare. The leader of the New Democratic Party, Tommy Douglas, had been Premier of Saskatchewan, where a universal healthcare program had been successful. Pearson, with no other choice, implemented the Medical Care Act of 1966, the prelude to the 1984 Canadian Health Act. This program was such a success and so popular that the Liberals were easily re-elected with a massive majority in 1968, after Pearson resigned. Pierre Elliott Trudeau took charge and easily remained in power until 1984, with a 9-month exception in 1979. In short, the Liberals remained in power throughout the 1960s because the Conservatives were so unpopular and the Liberals implemented good policies. Next up, the Americans. Throughout the 1950s, America had been run by a fairly conservative administration. Republican President Dwight Eisenhower had a huge approval rating, with 59% by the end of his term. With that in mind, it's fair to say that someone who was literally his vice president would have an easy time winning in that environment. Well, Vice President Richard Nixon, while tying himself close with Eisenhower, and therefore being popular, was no Eisenhower. He was seen as uncharming and not as charismatic as Eisenhower, nor his opponent in the election, Democrat John F. Kennedy. Kennedy easily gained most of the younger vote, since he was the younger candidate. Nixon may have only been 4 years older than him, but Kennedy had aura, and Nixon was Skibbity, Ohio. It really didn't help his case that the first ever debate was televised in 1960 between the two. Listeners on the radio agreed that Nixon had won, since he spoke about issues of higher importance. But television watchers agreed that Kennedy won because Nixon seemed tired and unprepared, while Kennedy seemed well-rested and perfectly prepared. I understand that I'm making it seem like this election was a landslide in favor of Kennedy because of Nixon's unpopularity. But Nixon was still fairly popular. He tied himself closely with the popular incumbent and used him to his advantage well. Many older and poorer voters liked him because he spoke to them better. He grew up dirt poor, while Kennedy was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. This election was very close between the popular Nixon and charismatic Kennedy. The electoral map does not do this election justice. Kennedy won the popular vote by 100,000 votes. For context, Trump won the popular vote in 2024 by over 2 million votes. Accusations of voter fraud by Nixon supporters in states like Texas and Illinois, where Kennedy won both by less than 50,000 votes, were significant. Nixon never himself accused Kennedy of voter fraud. but his supporters were very noisy. I know that was just a lot in 1960, but the next two are very quick, trust me. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, and Vice President Lyndon Johnson took over. The Kennedy assassination is such a controversial topic, but all I will say is that the assassination pulled voters towards the Democrats for the next year. In 1964, the choice was clear. Either vote for the calm Democrat who will send your sons to Vietnam, or Republican lunatic Barry Goldwater who will send the son to Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson won all but 6 states in the 1964 election with 61% of the popular vote, the most in American history. After Lyndon Johnson's catastrophic presidency, where he destroyed America's reputation in the Vietnam War while also escalating Cold War tensions, his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, ran against our old friend Richard Nixon in 1968. While Humphrey ran a great campaign, Nixon narrowly beat him. Once again, the electoral map does not do justice to the level of victory. Due to these electoral maps, the Bayh-Celler Amendment was proposed to get rid of the Electoral College altogether, although it was filibustered quickly. In Britain, the Conservative Party had been in power from 1951 until 1964. However, in 1964, unemployment was high throughout the country. That and high inflation damaged the Conservatives' credibility. Additionally, the United States canceled Skybolt, the program designed to provide Britain with an independent nuclear weapons delivery system. However, it wasn't just the US that hurt the Conservatives' chance of re-election. The French, always the French, and President Charles de Gaulle vetoed Britain's ascension into the European communities because of their close relationship with the Americans. For the longest time, it did look like the Conservatives would be re-elected. However, the emergence of the Profumo affair and former Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's handling of it damaged all credibility, forcing his resignation in late 1963. The Profumo affair was a scandal involving 46-year-old Secretary of State for War, John Profumo's extramarital affair with a 19-year-old model, Christine Keeler. Profumo denied the affair to the House of Commons, but a police investigation confirmed he was lying. This, obviously, caused a massive uproar amongst the British public, and Labour leader Harold Wilson won with a majority. However, Wilson won just one more seat than needed to win a majority. When he saw the Labour Party was performing poorly in by-elections, he called a general election in 1966. Wilson easily won the majority in 1966 election with 364 seats, 48 more than needed for a majority. Wilson lost the next election in 1970, handing power over to Edward Heath. Many other countries voted left-wing in the 1960s, such as Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, and many left-wing movements paved the way for independence in many colonies in Africa and America, like Jamaica or Ghana. But anyways, on to Australia. Australia's 1960s is probably the most interesting time in their history, to be honest. Commencing in 1961, long-term Prime Minister Robert Menzies was re-elected with barely enough seats for a majority. He ran again in 1963 despite being 68 years old and Prime Minister for 14 years. That didn't seem to matter as Menzies kept batting 1,000 throughout his premiership. He refused to cease aid to non-government-run schools and allowed an American-run communications facility on Australian soil. The Labour Party kinda screwed up as well. During the ALP Federal Conference in March 1963, a journalist photographed the leader of the Labour Party, Arthur Calwell, and deputy leader Gough Whitlam. Neither man was eligible to attend the conference, giving rise to the accusation that the Labour Party was run by 36 faceless men. Additionally, the Kennedy assassination helped cement Menzies' victories in the polls, as he won 72 out of the 124 eligible seats. On the 20th of January 1966, Menzies resigned as Prime Minister and as leader of the Liberals, and was replaced by his deputy, Harold Holt. Holt contrasted well as a stylish and charismatic man against Labour Arthur Calwell, who had already lost 2 elections by this point. Calwell also appeared poor on television in comparison to Holt, because he still defended the racist white Australia policy and nationalization. Holt easily won. In December 1967, Holt literally disappeared from the beach and he was never found. He was replaced by John Gorton, who would eventually win the 1969 election. The Liberal County Coalition dominated the 1960s. In fact, the Liberals were so dominant over Australia, they were solidly in power from 1949 until 1983, with only a 3-year gap in between. In conclusion, Australia voted right-wing because the Labour Party was just so damn unpopular in the country. However, unlike the 1980s, it was just purely a coincidence that Canada, America, and Britain voted left in the 1960s. There's no correlation like there was in the 80s to these three countries in the 60s. Many countries, even in the Anglosphere, voted right-wing throughout this decade. New Zealand and Ireland in the Anglosphere, and outside of it, Colombia, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and many other countries continued to vote right in the 1960s. Nonetheless, it is still interesting to see the United States, Canada, and the UK agree once more, and Australia disagree so heavily.